Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today I've got an exciting, fun video for you guys, as we're going to be talking about some wild trade proposals that the Jaguars could propose on draft day, whether first, second, or third day. But we've got some interesting ones in here, and I've got 5. It's going to get progressively crazier as we go, but I still want to choose things that could make some sense. And what I want to get across to you guys throughout this is that I think one of the ways Jacksonville can separate itself, and one way it's tried to in the past, and I applaud them for trying, is to get creative. Like, don't just do the obvious things, right? Do your homework. Research on maybe players that are available that most teams don't know about. You saw that in Ezra Cleveland. He just got a contract extension. Obviously, you could say, well, he sucked when he came here, but that's not the player he is. Much better in Minnesota. I could give you my whole argument, right? But I'm not going to do that right now. They've been creative on some of their trades, and they've taken advantage of opportunities people did not know were available. But they need to continue to do that. They need to think of ways that they could maybe move up in the draft and not give up too much capital. Maybe alternatives. You've got some players on this team that maybe they have value that aren't going to be here much longer that would be worth using as a trade piece. Just something to throw out there. Not that I love trading players, love all our guys here, but it's got to be thought about. I think you at least got to consider these things and be realistic. And so we're going to talk about some of them. I might piss off some people because some of these are kind of crazy, but it's okay. Well, that's a price I'm okay paying. We'll say that. So first one's not that crazy. Bundling late picks to move up in the draft. Now, obviously, the argument for this is how last year turned out. Because you look at day 3, and obviously, you don't know 100% for sure what everyone is because it's been 1 year. But this team traded for all these late picks. They wanted to move up. They didn't get it done. And then you got all these players that either have no role on the team, have taken 20 or less snaps, or are on another team already. There's not a lot of players from the very end of that draft who are still in Jacksonville. Where's Raymond Vahasek? He's not here. That'll happen when you don't trade. And so they've got to find a way. While I'm okay trading back at points and trying to get more picks, you need to make these picks valuable. This is not a team that needs to be focusing on bunches of selections in the 180s. This is a team that needs to consolidate picks, in rounds like the 3rd round. Maybe get an extra second. They need to find ways to get that done. And so one of these trades, just to throw one out there as an idea, if you want to move up with your late picks, it's usually a little harder to do that, right? And so you need to find a team that maybe has a big gap in where their selections are. So one example is the Detroit Lions, where I believe the gap that they have goes from pick 73, hopefully I get this number right, to 164. Nearly 100 selections where they're not picking. They already pick around 29-61. So you could throw together some picks to them. Give him 96, give him 114, give him 153, and now you're picking at the 73rd overall pick. Detroit has some selections that fill that bridge between those two very far away picks. And now Jacksonville has a pretty early 3rd rounder. And obviously you give up 96. That's probably it is the most valuable of all these picks, and you could get something out of that. But I think looking at this class and trying to project where things happen, right now that Jacksonville needs ideally a Z receiver. And there's a chance, and a pretty good chance, that they end up getting one of the top prospects. But what if that doesn't happen? What if Rome Odunze gets taken by the Titans and Neighbors is already gone 5th or 6th? What happens then? Well, now you got to have another plan. And I think the way that Jacksonville is currently set up, because you've made these long-term investments into your Y receiver, which is your slot, and your X receiver, which is your vertical guy, which is Gabe Davis, and you need a wide receiver 1 still. you have to solve your Z receiver problem and your wide receiver one problem with the same player, ideally. So you can either draft a top prospect, or you spend capital that maybe isn't as valuable to get a guy who can come in right now, be a solid starter, be a good value, and is probably at some point relegated to a backup role and, ends up starting when there's injuries and that sort of thing. But that's realistically what this pick might be able to accomplish. And maybe you get a stud. Try to take a shot on someone who has a ton of upside. And so you got one example in this photo, and Jalen McMillan, who, just to give some context for like the potential that this player has. A lot of people look at him as a slot receiver. I do think he can play Z as well, so I think he can be a fit. But as far as the potential, last year, before 2023, he came pretty dang close to matching Rome Odunze in production. The difference this year was that obviously Odunze had the insane breakout, but McMillan, he ended up getting hurt early in the year. And you look at their like average yards per game before Jalen McMillan went out. It's pretty dang close. Like Rome Odunze over the season, I think he comes out at around 109 yards a game, which is crazy. Jalen McMillan had, I think, 290s and 100. So he was a very productive player early in the year, and then he got hurt, wasn't able to get on the field much, and then just wasn't able to play the same from that point on. You see that over and over in the NFL. You see that in college football as well. So point is, like, you can see the argument, not that I'm saying Jalen McMillan is as good as Rome Odunze. I got to make that as clear as I can. But you can see with Jalen McMillan that this is probably a prospect who goes later than he should for reasons that are kind of out of his control. And so then you look at his game and you figure out, like, what's good about him? How could he fit? Is this a player with more upside than what people expect for where he's going to go? And I think he is. Like, I think Jalen McMillan goes somewhere around the middle of the third round. But you look at the way he plays the game, he is an incredible route runner. Like, he's one of the best ones in this class. He can get open doing that. And so I love the fact that he has some experience outside from a while back. He's been forced into the slot because, well, he's playing with Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk. I don't think he's going to be playing outside, right? So it's not really that he can't play outside. It's more so that he's the odd man out. And so you can still look at him as a better slot receiver, but I think he can play Z as well. He's proven that before. He was fine in that role. So Jalen McMillan, he's going to be a good route runner. He's going to get open. He has huge hands. And he's going to be a guy you're not going to have to worry about off the field as well, which has to be mentioned for players because you see more and more problems off the field for NFL players and prospects. But the main issue with McMillan that I have, and like this is probably where the Amon-Ra St. Brown comp gets a little unhinged, because that is the comp that's thrown around for McMillan. McMillan doesn't have that same physicality that Amon-Ra has. So that's the big difference, right? But could McMillan come in, be the Z receiver? He has good height as well, so he could play outside for that reason. Decent overall size. He comes in at nearly 200 pounds. Could he come in, be able to separate, get open with his route running skills, and be a safety blanket for this offense that gets close to 1,000 yards? Yes, he can. You can make this argument for a few other players around this range too. What about Javon Baker? Just a player who's just done great throughout his career, or maybe good would be a better word, but not major problems with him. Maybe he's a little more of an X than what you want. You want the Z receiver, but I think he can play that role. I think it's fine. And Trevor Lawrence exceeds when he's throwing down the field. And we haven't given him that option, so Javon Baker makes a ton of sense. What about Devontae Walker? I know people hate him at this point because he had a bad Senior Bowl week, and they're just like, this guy, he sucks at life, and he's never going to be good. Which is like seemingly the things I hear about him. It's fine to drop him because of that, but he's getting dropped like crazy far right now. And so maybe this is the trade that gets you up in range to get a player who is better than where he's getting drafted and can start for you. So making a move like this, you're going from picking like basically the runt of the litter at 96, or the runts of the litter would be better since there's so many selections. And then, trying to hit on late round picks that the Jaguars usually don't. So now you're up in range to get one of these players that you've had visit your facility, that they have a ton of upside. It could be really good. And you could steal a starter out of it. And so now, like, you still want a wide receiver 1, but you've got this nice solution to the problem for now. You take your time doing it the right way because you weren't able to get one of the top receivers, and you're sitting pretty dang pretty. And it doesn't even have to be a receiver. If you're moving up to 73, like maybe it's Michael Hall Jr., a defensive tackle to add to the rotation. Maybe it's a pass rusher. Maybe Marshawn Nealon falls there. There's a lot of different things I can throw out. Could be a guard of the future. But you're moving up into range to get one of those players, because when you get into the third round, that's where drafts start to kind of phase out. It's like if you're playing Mario and you've got the star power and it's phasing in and out, and at any second it's going to be over. That's what the third round usually feels like in the NFL draft, just for an analogy. So I like the idea of Jacksonville getting aggressive, moving up with a team that's going to be looking to move back realistically, unless they want to wait 100 picks. And the Detroit Lions are very aggressive in their trading. And generally what I've noticed too is that when they are trading, they tend to get a little less value if you're going off of like the Draft Tech website and what they value picks at. So maybe it's a team that you could get a pretty good deal out of. So I like the idea of looking for things like that. Now, the flip side of this, moving back for the day 2 slide. So what I mean by this is more so talking about your second round pick, right? So at 48, say there's a ton of really good options, and you've got a team like the Panthers. Maybe they're desperate. Maybe they're trying to just load this team up this year because they got to get Bryce Young on the right track. And so they offer you their 65th overall pick, which you're still in range if you want to move up a few spots, maybe using 141, which is mentioned here, to go up and get a player that falls if you had multiple that you liked. Now you got a future third from a team that didn't do well last year, and it wouldn't be shocking if they still struggled this year. So it's trying to find opportunities that you can take advantage of, right? And so if you got all these prospects that are similarly ranked, then make the move. Like, say for me, it could be Chris Jenkins, it could be Christian Haynes, it could be Renardo Green, like 3 players to throw out. And I have very similar grades on them. They all are options. Say we haven't addressed either of those positions, or you're even looking at a receiver. If you just stay put at 65, you're okay with that. You're getting a future third, and you just wait until one of those players is left. Go make your little move, because by that point, it's going to be close to your pick. And now you've benefited, and you still got a player that you wanted. So you got to be careful, of course, trading back. But when you get aggressive in doing that, it can pay off. And you saw it pay off last year. The main difference that I want to see from last year is that we're talking about picks that stayed in the 4th, 5th, and 7th round, right? They never were turned into anything more. And so, I mean, I guess, to be fair, like one of them was Antonio Johnson. I don't count it because it's such a fluky pick. I mean, clearly they didn't know how good he was going to be, because you wouldn't pick him at 160th or 161st overall if you knew how good the player was going to be. You would have picked him 4 earlier selections than where you did. So that's where I don't really see the value as much of what they did, just being honest with it, not trying to take away all the credit, but they skipped him so many times. I just don't think they really knew what they were getting. But I want to see this team, if they move back, like turn these picks into valuable selections. Try to amass selections on day 2 where this draft is still deep. You're going to have receivers falling because it's a stacked class. Load up at that position because you're weak there right now. You need depth. I don't know if Devin Duvernay is really a player you want to have start too much at receiver. He did not play there, like basically at all last year. He's a return man. So I think they could use that. And then, of course, it could be just simply moving back for one of these players that I mentioned, or, like in the background, Renardo Green. Now, we got 3 more here, and we're going to get wild. First one's not as wild as the others, but we're going to start talking about players. We're going to talk about players that this team could acquire and players that this team could trade away to other teams that could use them, see a lot of value in it, get rid of a draft day need, maybe be freed up to go take the best player on the board once they pick after you do. But the first one, it's an interdivision trade. And rip me apart if you want. Actually, you'll hurt my feelings if you do that. But John Mechie III from the Houston Texans. I want to give you guys reasoning for why this is even a thought, why this is even possible, and why this makes a crap ton of sense for Jacksonville. Going back to the 2022 NFL Draft, which is where Mechie was a prospect, Jacksonville had a ton of interest in John Mechie. He was one of the, I think out of all the receivers, this was the player they were the most interested in. It was a player they wanted to land. But ultimately what happened in the 2022 NFL Draft was that a ton of wide receivers were selected way earlier than they were supposed to. Once we got to pick 65, like just based off of general big boards, the best player on the board was Jalen Tolbert. And you know what grade I had on him? And most people did? A 5th round grade. So they drafted basically all the way through the 4th round of receivers in 2 rounds. And one of those players was John Mechie. And Mechie should have fallen because he had a torn ACL. But everyone got pushed up the board. And sure enough, the Houston Texans, as they always do, usually tend to take players that we like at the receiver position. They've done it with Xavier Hutchinson as well. That was another player I liked. But it is what it is, right? And so what's happened with John Mechie now is that after getting drafted, unfortunately, and it was a terrible thing, he was diagnosed with cancer very shortly after. Now, this form of cancer he had, it was a type of leukemia. It was the most treatable form of cancer there pretty much is. So what happened was he was treated. He was able to fully recover, but he didn't get to play his first year. He was not drafted by D'Amico Ryans. This was a player who was drafted by Lovie Smith. So now you get to D'Amico Ryans coming in. He's overhauled that receiving core. They had Nico Collins, who has broken out this last year. They drafted Tank Dell, who they have a lot of plans for. And now they traded for Stephon Diggs. So all of a sudden, this 2nd round pick that even last year, when he was healthy, was not really given opportunities on the field, is just a backup. And this is not a player who should be a backup in the NFL. I'll put my word on that. He's a good player. If you go watch his film in college, you can see why this player can be good as a Z receiver. He's fast, he's shifty, he's a plus level route runner. He gets open. And you can even see, playing with the Houston Texans last year, the limited opportunities he got, he was getting open for them. I saw one play pretty dang quick into it where he just got overthrown by Stroud. Not something Stroud does a ton. He played great last year. But Mechie, he just didn't get the opportunities. And when he did something with them, but just wasn't enough, right? And so this is a player to me that is good, that has not been given the chance to get a starting job in the NFL. And it's an opportunity for the Jaguars, even though it's a division trade. If you think you can send him a pick, you can go get him, which I think 153 could get it done. And I'll be bold here and say I would even send up the 116. I would even consider slightly more if I had to. That's how much I would trade for him, because I think he's an actual good player. But while it's a division rival, you're okay making that move if you think you're getting the better side of the trade, because then you're hurting your division rival, you're helping yourself, you're doing a little bit of what the Houston Texans usually do to us, which is take all the old players and start them when they play against Jacksonville. They do that every year. It's crazy how many players they've had go through there that came from Jacksonville. And maybe we could do that with a player. Now, do I think this happens? No. Don't expect it. I don't know how creative Jacksonville gets in the first place. And I think Houston would consider it if Jacksonville sent a much better offer. And this probably is a much better offer because he had cancer. Like, I don't think that impacts what he is, because the route running that he still had at the NFL level was good. Like, he felt like the same player. But to teams, absolutely. Like, no one's probably going to send much more than this. So Mechie makes an incredible amount of sense because you're sending 153 in this scenario. Not a super important pick, right? You're probably not going to get a great player there. And maybe you could, but the chances are just so low. And you're flipping this pick into a guy with 2 years left on his rookie deal, who's dirt cheap, who has, I think, way more potential than any player you're going to get at 153. And you go get that guy. He fits into the Z role. If you cannot get a receiver in this class, you at least have a plan there. And I think you want to still get some help. But now you can move on from the Zay Jones contract. I don't think you keep him if you have Mechie. I don't think Zay Jones should be on the field over Mechie. I might sound insane saying that. I probably do. But I genuinely believe that. Go watch the film on Mechie. I think he's a good player. And so you could save $8 million over the next 2 years. You send a pick that doesn't matter a whole ton. You steal a good player from a division rival that you can believe is a good player that maybe they don't think is as good as you think he is. And now you might have a starting receiver at, the high end of this, of course. And he could be a very good wide receiver for all you know. But it's exactly what it says here. Find a low risk, high reward option. And this is the perfect example of it, because if you miss, if he's not what you thought he was, well, you have a pretty good backup for 2 years and you paid 153 for it. It's pretty even, if you ask me. I mean, unless Houston goes out and drafts the next Puka Nacua at 153, like, we're fine. So just a thought there. That's probably a little crazy, but I'm willing to consider crazy if it ends up working out. And this makes too much sense, given that Jacksonville had so much interest in him, wasn't able to land him. Now he's probably going to be available for dirt cheap, and you can easily outbid what their team should be offering for him, because this is not some player that's worth a third or probably even a fourth. You can send a fifth and probably get it done. Now, the fourth thing I want to mention here, it's called offering mutualistic solutions. Which sounds like I'm doing some sort of marketing. What I mean by this is finding a way when you trade with other teams to offer them something that fills a need of theirs that could increase the value of the player you're sending. So, for example, say that you see the Colts picking at 15. You have a player on the board you really want. You're worried about them going to Indianapolis. It could be a tackle. More realistically, it would probably be a corner that you're worrying about. And you want to get up in front of them. You didn't get up to 13. You look at a team like New Orleans that Ryan Ramczyk has injury concerns, might not even play this year. Trevor Penning has not been as good as expected, but still, he was drafted by the current regime. He's been starting 2 years. So there's still probably another year that he gets a shot. They need a tackle. And so you've got a guy that can start, like, quite frankly, and be fine. Not the greatest in the world, but still be fine. Lock down a need for a year, dirt cheap for them, and he's sitting on your bench. And the important thing, of course, you can say, well, you need a swing tackle. Well, for one, you could draft one, and two, you could just go sign Cam Fleming and the problem's done. Because there's players out there you can go get that can do the same thing. It don't cost a ton, but Walker Little has, the potential, obviously, that maybe a team like the Saints would like. And Jacksonville just not giving him the chance. And I just don't see a world where Walker Little, after getting done with a 4-year deal, a rookie deal, of course, where he was just never given a shot after being a high draft pick and playing fine most of the time. I don't see him being like, yeah, I want to come back to Jacksonville. No, he wants to go to a team that's actually going to give him a chance. Maybe he plays great for him and he gets a contract. That's a possibility. Wouldn't be too shocked by it. But the point is, like, Walker Little doesn't have much value on your bench. And he's gone after this year. You got one more year. You never gave him the starting reps that he needed to actually know whether this guy is good or bad. That was something I kind of forewarned against last year, or at least was in my mind that I was thinking of, whether or not I put it out publicly, that Walker Little, we needed to figure out what he was then, because you don't want to do it in the contract year and then have no clue what to pay him. You want to know what he is for a while, especially so you could have maybe moved off the Cam Robinson contract earlier, like last year, maybe at the trade deadline, to a team that needed a tackle. But this is the way they've dealt with it, and at this point, like, I think you got to try to get some value out of it. And so you can approach a team like the Saints that picks right before a division contender. Maybe they want Quinyon Mitchell, just to throw out an example. And you say, hey, well, we've got this starting caliber tackle on our bench because we've loaded at that position. We've got 2 starters we trust. We know you have cap issues. He costs practically nothing. You can take the best player here, and at 17 that is, and we'll throw in pick 153 with that. The value of like Walker Little in a trade, probably around a 4th to 5th round pick. So these combined should be about enough to move up with New Orleans. You give up a player who's not starting, and you give up a pick that isn't super valuable. I mean, obviously, maybe you trade it for Mechie. I hope you did. But just say you have that, because you're probably not going to do that. You can flip this to New Orleans and move up in front of your rival and get the player that you want that maybe they wanted. So that's a very enticing option to me in this draft, especially say that New Orleans wants a pass rusher too, but they can't do that and they feel like they got to get someone on day one. This is a solution. So you got to try to find a way to maybe offer something that's more valuable to another team than what it would be on average, and Walker Little to the Saints would be one of those examples. Now, for our final one, I've got a crazy trade proposal here involving a big-time, well, yeah, I'd say a big-time player based off the contract for the Jaguars, even though he's been injured quite a bit. And that is moving up with the Kansas City Chiefs from 48 to 32. They have $23 million in cap space. You got Cam Robinson, very expensive right now. Say in this scenario you haven't flipped Walker Little, you believe he can start, and you say, hey, we got the other bookend that Juwan Taylor played so well with in Jacksonville. You need a left tackle. You have Wanya Morris. That's not good enough. We all know that. We will send you Cam. We'll send you 48, and we'll send you a 4th round pick. You can solve your need. You can move back in a loaded class. We want to get this prospect. We will trade with you. Maybe it's worth a little different than this. Maybe you have to offer a little bit more. I think this is generally pretty close. I think Cam Robinson is probably worth a late 3rd to an early 4th right now. Now, the thing I want to note with Cam Robinson too, I think there's a reason why his contract is not changed yet. And I think it's because Jacksonville wants to remain flexible in their options. I think there's no reason for them to, at this point, have, say, made him take a pay cut and converted stuff to signing bonus when maybe Olu-Fashanu's there and you take him. Or you take Troy Fatanu and you think he can be your left tackle. Or you take Amarius Mims and you think he can be your right tackle. Whoever it is, throw in any name you want. That would be a logical starting tackle. If you do that, then now you still have the flexibility with Cam. But the point is, if you trade him to Kansas City, for example, Kansas City can just simply say, all right, Cam, well, we're going to give you a contract. You're going to get most of what you could have got in Jacksonville if you can reach these incentives. And because these incentives were not reached the previous year, well, Kansas City doesn't have to pay him against the cap. They just pay him the money. It doesn't count against cap space because it wasn't money he was expected to earn. Even though in reality, like, if he's healthy, he probably will earn that. So Kansas City can be creative then, save money on it. Maybe they're only paying $9 million against the cap. And this is a team as well. Keep in mind, they're focused on going all in this year. And they were fine paying L'Jarius Sneed for 1 year to do that. They traded him because they got a good enough offer. So I think they'd be fine taking in a player like Cam Robinson makes a ton of sense, would fit their scheme, be a starter. You've got your swing tackle in Wanya Morris. You lock down that need. Now at 48, you got that extra pick. You could even trade up if you need to and do the Arizona Cardinals thing that they like to do where they move around all the time. You have that option if you're Kansas City. And then now for Jacksonville, you're taking advantage of a player who drops down the board. So maybe it's Kool-Aid McKinstry. Could be possible. And if I throw out any specific name like Kool-Aid, everyone's going to say, well, you're drinking the Kool-Aid because that guy ain't falling to 32. The reality is, if we talk about everyone individually, then yeah, we're going to say there's no way they're available at 32. The reality is that the way the draft goes, there is almost always a player that should not be there at 32. So this is a way for Jacksonville to move up a big chunk of picks with a team that could use their left tackle. You still have Walker Little who can start. And it's a one-year solution, like Cam Robinson is as well. You only give up 114 along with your second rounder. And you've still got, 96, 116, 153. All those later picks except for the 1/4 rounder. That's a pretty good deal for Jacksonville. So these are some ideas to throw out there. Do I think any of them will happen? No, I don't. I don't know if Jacksonville goes this crazy. We'll have to see. But the point I want to make once again is that one of the ways that this team can separate itself, and it's succeeded to do this in the past for the most part with Trent Baalke, is to find opportunities that other teams may not be looking into to, offer a trade that is beneficial to themselves, that is going to be a win for them. Because if you're going to move on from Cam at the end of the year, for example, and you got to start Walker Little, who's not as good, but not so much worse than Cam Robinson, and now you only give up your 4th and move up and get a legit first-round pick, that's fine. You're winning that situation. Okay, Kansas City also feels like they're winning. That's fine, though. Both teams should feel that way. You can find opportunities to do that, and you got to be creative, and you got to try to look for the players that might be available, the players that teams might want from you, that might have more value with that team than what they would on the open market usually. So just got to think about it, and they got to get creative. They got to think about things to do, because you look at the history, it's generally either worked out or should have worked out, right? When it worked out was Ezra Cleveland. Even though if you don't like him, don't think he's good, this was a player that made a lot of sense for Jacksonville. They got him dirt cheap, and they signed him to a pretty good contract. And he should be finer than that. He should be much better. And I think by the end of next season, he'll prove that. The other one that did not end up working out at the end of the day, but I don't think it's because of the trade conditions. I think it's because of simply the way other things were handled that you've heard me rant about over and over, was the trade for Calvin Ridley. It was very creative. It was smart. And the team built in an insurance policy to protect itself. Why it didn't work out and looked like a complete hellscape by the end of it, because they couldn't sign him by a certain date, was because the Jaguars should have had the option to use the franchise tag to bypass all of it. It was clearly out there as an opportunity, and they refused to negotiate with Josh Allen until a month after the season ended, which is where the whole problem came in, because you couldn't let Josh hit the market. This team would be effed if they did that. So this is the situation you get in. Calvin Ridley walks, and the deal just looks atrocious. But at the end of the day, I think the terms were fine. It's just that the way they dealt with it after was just terrible. It was like they forgot what they wrote on paper. And so, they made the rules of the game and they lost. And then we've talked about that. But I think when they've got creative, it's generally worked out very well for them, and they've taken advantage of opportunities that most teams don't think are available to them. And they have to continue to do that. So let me know. Do you got a crazy trade proposal you want to see? What do you think about some of these? What's one you would actually do? Or, do you think one of these wouldn't be accepted? I'm sure everyone will have one of those. I'm sure some of these will look insane. But just give me your thoughts, even on your own. I'd love to hear it. It's fun to think about this stuff, but we're getting close to the draft. We're going to know soon. I'm really excited for it. I can't say that enough. You're going to hear it at the end of every video until April 25th. And, hopefully we draft a very good player. But thanks for joining me. I appreciate you all being on this channel, interacting. It's been a blast. It's going to continue to be a blast. But that's all I've got for you today. So have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.